the Renwood Hotel. Look, I know that's where your mother was murdered. And I know it'll be upsetting for you. Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past. Confront that fear head on. Grace, I won't force you to go. But do you think you can do this for me? Investigate that crime scene and report back to me with your findings. That's all for now.
So I'm just going to tell you straight up, I have no words for how much I loved this game. Yes, part of that can be looked at as a bias for Resident Evil as a Resident Evil fan, but I'm not afraid to get critical when I have to with the series. With that said, Resident Evil Requiem was a game that I was initially a bit worried about. I was down with having a new protagonist. I ended up loving Grace. I wasn't surprised when Leon was revealed to be in it later. Leon is Leon at the end of the day. But what had me concerned was how they would handle the story and the balance of the horror-centric Grace gameplay and the action-focused Leon gameplay. I am happy to report that I believe they nailed both sides of the equation. So excuse me while I fanboy just a little bit. Resident Evil Requiem stars a new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft from the Resident Evil Outbreak games. She's a timid, awkward, and deeply anxious character.
Active crime scene.
Oh, right. Sorry. Just a sec.
Oh, you're FBI?
I am.
Investigating all these strange deaths, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's the 5th one now, right? I heard they all have the same weird bruises, so you think it's something infectious, or terrorism, or... Why else would the FBI be investigating, right? Hey, are you with me?
Oh, there might be answers inside.
Yeah, sure, right. Be careful in there. Whole building's condemned. Word is they're finally gonna bring the whole place down.
Yeah, thanks.
A first for the series, to my knowledge, and perfect for a horror setting, much to her dismay. Something I really love that they do with her character is to portray her anxiety, not just in her stutters when she's talking to people, but also with the fact that she can't make eye contact with people. She's always looking at the ground and stuff like that. It's a very minor thing, but it's very easy to kind of just say a character is deeply anxious, but they don't behave that way outside of certain contexts. So you really get the idea that, man, you really are not good with talking with people, are you? Obviously there are reasons for that, but let's move along. Grace is tasked by her boss in the FBI to investigate a murder at the Renwood Hotel, the same hotel Alyssa was murdered at. From there, everything flips on its head, as you'd expect from Resident Evil, and after she is kidnapped by the game's antagonist Victor Gideon, Leon goes after him to save her. I will say this real quick because I've seen other people pointing it out. I'm just wondering, what was her boss? I think his name is Nathan. I can't remember his last name. Why would he task someone with PTSD for her mom being murdered at the same hotel she has to investigate? I get that he gave her a choice, and obviously Grace wants answers, but not a good move. I don't know. That's just me. Bare minimum, you could have sent her with some backup or whatever. And frankly, in fairness, there was a cop there, but Resident Evil, so the cop was no longer there, if you get what I mean. Anyway, Narratively, I believe Resident Evil Requiem has the strongest story in a Resident Evil game in a while, at least for me. I'm not saying that the other stories sucked. I'm not saying that there aren't others that are also strong in the franchise. I'm just saying that when I tell people about Resident Evil games, I'm typically talking about the horror, the overtop action in some of the cases where it applies, and the extensive lore in the games. I'm not over here gushing over, say, Resident Evil 6's story or 5's story, but I am gushing over the lore. You know what I'm saying? Each individual story in a Resident Evil game can vary in its quality. After Resident Evil 6, when the series did its soft reboot with Resident Evil 7, another excellent Resident Evil game, by the way, I couldn't tell whether or not Capcom wanted to fully acknowledge the previous games. Yes, they'd make callouts and references, but Ethan's story felt fairly detached from it all. So while Resident Evil 7 and 8 were great games in their own rights, I often wondered how it all connected to the bigger story, or if it was just on pause or revising elements already told. So you can imagine my excitement when Resident Evil 9 essentially took us back home with its story. Grace is a new character, but she's at least connected to the events of Raccoon City in some way which makes her feel more familiar than the initial blank slate that Ethan was. Leon returns and is Leoning all over the place, as you'd expect, but he's also the most tired he's ever been, mostly tired of this shit, but also tired for other reasons that I'm not going to spoil. There are a lot of references and things Resident Evil fans will be able to pick up on, but even on its own, the story is pretty damn good, in my opinion. Before I move on to the gameplay and how that all meshes together, I want to shout out the visuals. I have a decently strong PC with a 4070 Super graphics card in it, but unfortunately I get stutters here and there when transitioning from one area to another sometimes, or even when there's a sudden burst of particles from large explosions and whatnot. Thankfully, the settings are as flexible as you'd expect from recent Resident Evil games now, and they can be tweaked. So it's possible that I didn't tweak my settings well enough, and the fact that I was recording at the same time could have contributed to it, but it's also possible that it's something that just happens for some reason to most people on PC, since I've seen other people encounter this similar issue. Stuttering issues and frame drops aside, the game is still stunning to look at. There's a lot of detail packed into just about everywhere you go, and rarely did I ever look at something in the environment and go, ew, that could look better. I'm not great at going into deep detail about graphics and the various technical details, but what I can say is that it do be looking really good. Anyway, going on to gameplay, this again was one of my biggest concerns. I couldn't help but think about Resident Evil 6 when they said that they wanted to give us both horror and action in the same game, like give them the same amount of attention. Obviously they've done similar before, like with 8 and whatnot, but 8 felt overwhelmingly like a action game, kind of like Resident Evil 4 did, with some horror splashed in there. Here it was very much implied that they were going to give them equal-ish attention, with Grace being the horror gameplay and Leon being the action gameplay. The reason I was thinking about Resident Evil 6 was because Leon's campaign in that game was supposed to lean more on horror, but it quickly devolved into a Michael Bay action flick in video game form. I also couldn't help but think that it'd be too jarring to juggle both playstyles for two very different kinds of characters. So it's good to know that I was proven wrong in my concerns. The two gameplay styles don't overlap, but rather complement each other. For the first half of the game, Grace's more horror-centric gameplay is the sentence, while Leon's action-centric gameplay is the punctuation. The second half of the game is Leon's turn to be the sentence, and Grace becomes the punctuation. Meaning, first half of the game is mostly Grace, with Leon appearing occasionally for gameplay, and then in the second half of the game, you're Leon most of the time, with Grace appearing here and there for gameplay. Grace's gameplay is very much what we've come to expect after playing Resident Evil 7 and 8, only she benefits a bit more from stealth, since they really emphasize that she can't take zombies head on in the same way that Leon can. In fact, Grace is given the Requiem, basically a hand cannon, very large gun. I like to imagine her firing it and then just flying backwards because she's not used to it. But anyway, she's given that gun early on by Leon, didn't mean to rhyme there, as a I don't want to deal with this enemy anymore card that should only be used when you're in trouble. It won't insta-kill every enemy, but it will take care of most and often at the same time if you aim it just right. Other than that, Grace has her trusty handgun and can craft various items to help her clear out any zombies that need clearing. To craft some of those kinds of items, including ink ribbons, if you play on classic mode like I did, you will need infected blood, which you can find on the ground or in buckets, or drop by enemies when they're killed. Grace's gameplay overall is slow-paced and definitely had me fairly nervous and afraid of every corner I turned, but playing as Leon basically had me looking at those zombies and saying, "You're next," before roundhouse kicking them into another universe. Leon's gameplay is very similar to what you'd expect if you played Resident Evil 4 Remake, except instead of a knife, he has a hatchet this time. And unlike Grace, he doesn't have a storage box that he can access. Instead, he gets a supply box. Yeah, he gets a supply box that he can purchase different guns and items from with points that you rack up from killing enemies. So his gameplay very much encourages you to be aggressive. That said, much like in Resident Evil 4 Remake, you still need to be smart with how you approach things. Get overconfident and you could lose your head. Another tidbit I want to mention that's a welcome change is that you can change the perspective of both Leon and Grace anytime in the options menu. I played my first playthrough, before playing my second one right now, the way that Capcom intended. Grace in first person and Leon in third person. But if you don't want to do that, you could change Grace to third and Leon to first and vice versa, if you want. Overall, I think they nailed the balance between the horror segments and the action segments of both characters from beginning to end, while introducing a few surprises along the way. One more shout out before I close out this review. The music is excellent and entirely dependent on who you're playing. If you're playing as Grace, for example, the music will be more haunting and chilling. This goes for the save room theme when you're playing as her as well. If you're playing as Leon, the music is clearer, more confident, darker in a way, and this is also reflected in the save room music when you're playing as Leon. And the ending theme goes hard, enough said. So I don't think I need to say it since you already knew from the jump, but Resident Evil Requiem gets a go for it from me and can be purchased on PC and modern consoles, including the Switch 2, which I heard it runs pretty decently on, for $70. Now I do want to point out that Resident Evil games can often range, from what I've seen, between 12 to 18 hours to get through, so if, despite the quality of the game, you think that's too expensive up front for a game you might only play once, then I highly recommend picking it up on a sale, because Capcom has a lot of Capcom sales, especially on Steam. I finished the game after a small reset where I lost a couple of hours because I ran out of resources, at about 18 hours according to Steam. But the in-game clock after I finished the game said I finished at 10 hours and 30 minutes. That said, I don't think it counts pausing and cutscenes, which there are a lot of cutscenes. I also got the game from a friend for my birthday recently, but even then I fully intended to buy it myself, so if it sucked, I would tell you. The only reason I'm explaining all of the song and dance is because $70 is still a very contentious price for a lot of people, myself included. I don't buy $70 games all that often, but Resident Evil was an exception for me. So anyway, go buy Resident Evil Requiem and have yourself a great time, or pick it up later and have yourself a great time then. Up to you. And with that, it's time for me to get through this other game that I'm in the middle of before returning to Silksong to get that true ending for that review down the road. So I hope you all have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you all later.